The Rolex Submariner, possibly the most recognizable watch in existence. I even remember as a young lad watching my father conduct business with a Submariner on his wrist. I always strived to have that level of style, to have a statement piece that told everyone I meant business. And when I saw James Bond wearing it when I was a teenager, well, that's the moment I knew the second I could, I was going to get one of those bad boys and wear it everywhere I went. For some, waiting for new watch models to be released is like waiting for Apple to drop a new iPhone or Elon to announce a new Tesla, and that's precisely why Rolex announcing the 2020 Submariner took the world of horology by storm. Today, we're going to dive as deep as the Submariner can go and take a look at what this new model has in store for the world. We'll discuss the changes between this model and the last, the cost of this model, and whether it's actually worth the money, because this beautiful piece of machinery starts at $8,100. But to really understand the Submariner, I think it's important we take a look back at the history of Rolex. After all, the history of the company and the Submariner model itself is heavily influential in the power, appeal, and the price on the newest model. Rolex is the name that comes to mind when we think of luxury watches, and it has been that way pretty much since wrist watches came into fashion for men. Though wrist watches were invented in 1810, they weren't all the rage back then. Wrist watches were first worn as a fashion statement by women in the mid-1800s, and at the time, the watches were woefully inaccurate. Men wore watches during wartime, and it wasn't until World War I, when watches were necessary in trench warfare, that wristwatches started to be worn by men as a fashion choice. Even at that time, many viewed it as a fad. The New York Times famously referred to the wristwatches as wrist bracelets, and they even said it was just a silly fad. Boy, were they wrong. By that time, watches hadn't become much more accurate. That's when Hans Wilsdorf stepped onto the scene and changed everything. Living in London, he wanted watches to be more accurate and more stylish. He began manufacturing and selling watches that were more precise, and selling them under the name Rolex. But why the name Rolex? Wilsdorf had three reasons. One, the name could fit on the watches. Two, the name could be pronounced easily in quite a few languages. And three, the name was an onomatopoeia for the sound of winding up a watch. I'm not too sure about that one, but give this a listen and let me know what you think. It may seem like Rolex took off immediately and the watches were selling for millions of dollars, but that's fairly far from the truth. It took time and several certificates to build up credit for the brand. In 1914, Rolex was given a Class A certificate, which had only been awarded to marine chronometers up to that point. Around that time is where Rolex pulled out the big guns and did some marketing that people could learn a lot from today. In 1926, Rolex made the first waterproof watch, and the world didn't believe it. To prove that the watch was really waterproof, stores selling the watches would submerge them in an aquarium tank in store windows. But Rolex needed something bigger, something a bit flashier, something that would make newspaper headlines. And they got that in 1927, when Mercedes Gleitz became the first British woman to swim across the English Channel, and she did it wearing a Rolex. Rolex quickly bought out full-page ads to detail how their watch had held up the 10-hour swim and remained completely on time for the entire journey. But that wasn't enough. In 1953, a Rolex went with Edmund Hillary as he and Tenzing Norgay became the first people to climb Mount Everest. In 1960, a Rolex watch was brought to the bottom of the Mariana Trench when Jacques Piccard made his famous descent. Within a 7-year period, a Rolex had gone to the extremes of the Earth, both the highest and the lowest places, spanning a vertical distance of 65,227 feet. And while all this was going on, Rolex unveiled some technology that would change the world of watchmaking forever. They patented a self-winding mechanism that relies on gravity to move more freely. This creation became standard in all watches and was called a perpetual rotor. This would spark the Rolex line known as the Oyster Perpetual line, which the Submariner is part of. Then, in 1953, the the Submariner was brought out to the world, and surprisingly, it hasn't changed too drastically since. Though the 2020 Submariner has subtle changes that are breathtaking, the Submariner is known for sporting a classic look with a 3-link silver oyster bracelet. However, the new model gives you more style options than previous models did. The 2020 Submariner has 8 different references. There are 7 different configurations of the date model of the Submariner, which present a few different metal and color combinations so you can find what really makes your clock tick. There are 2 references with oyster steel, one of which has black dials and a black bezel, and the other which has black dials with a green bezel. Then there are 2 references in yellow gold, one of which has a black bezel and a black dial, and the other has a blue dial and bezel. I must say, I thought I liked the simple look best, but there's something about this blue bezel that really fancies my interest. Then there's a white gold reference that really mixes it up with a blue bezel and black dial. And finally, there's a 2-tone watch with oyster steel and yellow gold, one of which has a blue on blue, while the other has black on black. If you're a no-date kind of person, which I actually am, there is a clean model with a black dial and black bezel available. Now that we've got style out of the way, what about substance? How different can this model really be from its predecessors? Though some people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Rolex doesn't always stick to that mantra. Instead, they aim to make the watches bigger and better. Perhaps the biggest change in the watch is the new movement within the watch. The previous model of Submariner was powered by a caliber 3130 movement, while the no-date model of the 2020 has been updated with Rolex's in-house caliber 3230 movement. The 3230 has 3 days of power reserve. The 7 different date models of the watch utilize the caliber 3235, which has a 70-hour power reserve. So, now that we've talked about better, what about bigger? The 2020 model has a 41mm case, which is 1mm bigger than the 40mm case, which has been standard in the past. This makes this watch the largest Submariner ever made, but don't let the size scare you away. Rolex made a few slight changes to keep balance within the appearance of the watch even after increasing its size. This included using slimmer lugs, which allowed the design to feel slim even with that 1mm increase in size. There are other subtle appearance changes, including slightly smaller hour markers and a tiny difference between the proportions of the dials and the bezel. The text at the bottom of the watch, which read Swiss made on previous models, now reads Swiss made, but with that classic Rolex crown on top. Looks like they're feeling a bit more confident about their roots this year. The oyster bracelet has also had some slight design changes. It still retains the classic 3-link oyster bracelet. However, the links fit together a bit tighter, which creates a sleek, seamless design with no gaps. And while looking at watches shine during the day is fine, I can't leave without mentioning how incredible this watch looks at night. Though I won't be diving in any dark underwater caves anytime soon, I can't help but feel safer and cooler with the steady blue glow of the watch. Of course, I need to touch on the price point just once more. At $8,100, I have to say, this feels like a fantastic deal, especially considering the most expensive Rolex ever sold went to auction for $17 million. Part of the reason Rolex became so popular is because while they are a luxury item with a fairly high price point, that price point is just low enough so those in well-paying jobs can still buy one. It opens the luxury market up to those who can't buy fancy yachts and private jets, and if you ask me, it is a pretty smart move. So, there you have it, the 2020 Rolex Submariner. What do you think of the new model? Is it something you'll be looking to purchase? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Oh, and maybe turn on post notifications as well. As always, I'm Mr. Luxury. Pip pip to doodly do.